To some breaking news coming into us now from Turkey, and a court in Izmir has ruled that a US pastor, Andrew Brunson, being held on terrorism charges and espionage, will be released from house arrest 2 years after he was detained. Pastor Andrew Brunson was charged with espionage and links to terrorist organizations and was at the center of a diplomatic row between Ankara and Washington. And now for more on this verdict, let's go straight to TRT World's diplomatic correspondent Hasan Abdullah, who is at the court in Izmir. Hasan, tell us more.
Well, the prosecutors were seeking 10-year sentence for Andrew Brunson over terrorism charges, but 3 of the prosecution witnesses had retracted their earlier statements, and of course that weakened the case of the prosecution. Now, considering the evidence that was available, the court sentenced him to 3 years, 1 month and 15 days. But because of the time he had already served, 2 years and about 30 days, the court decided that Brunson will not serve sentence because of that time already served. So he has now been released on the order of the court.
Well, Hassan, how have the judges come to this decision, taking what into account exactly?
Well, the judges, of course, have been cross-examining today the prosecution witnesses, and at least 3 of the witnesses who had earlier claimed that they had first-hand information of Brunson's, at that time, of course, alleged involvement with terrorist groups like the PKK and FETÖ. They today retracted their statements, and they said that their information was based on second-hand sources they had heard from other sources, and of course that weakened the case of the prosecution based on this and also the other evidence that was available. So there were espionage charges that were brought against him, and also charges related to terrorism, supporting and abetting terrorist organizations, the PKK and FETÖ. So based on the evidence that was available and what was substantiated by the prosecution, the court sentenced him to 3 years and 45 days. But because of the time he had already served, about 2 years and a month, the time he had served in jail, and also the time he had served from July this year until now under house arrest because of his health conditions, the court decided that he's not going to serve the remaining 1 year or so. And of course, they seem to have taken several factors into account, including his health condition.
And what have we heard so far from Pastor Andrew Brunson inside the court?
Well, we haven't had a statement from him yet, but those who were there to support him when the prosecution witnesses were being cross-examined, they did seem quite content with the proceedings of the court here. And some of them had off camera at that time spoken, and they were saying that they are quite pleased with the way the proceedings are going, and they were saying that they were hopeful that he would be released. Now, of course, the court has, based on the evidence that was available, sentenced him to 3 years and 45 days, but because of the time that has already been served in jail and also under house arrest, he's no longer going to be spending any more time in prison. But, of course, there is that conviction that stands as well.
Well, thank you very much for that, Hasan Abdullah, there in front of the court in Izmir, and we'll definitely be coming back to you for more. But who was Pastor Andrew Brunson, and why was he arrested in the first place? TRT World's Caitlin McGee takes a look at the man who was at the center of a diplomatic storm between Turkey and the United States.
To Turkey, he was suspected of having connections with terrorist organisations and being involved in the 2016 failed coup. To the United States, he's an innocent man of faith. US pastor Andrew Brunson has been at the centre of a standoff between Ankara and Washington. But now, more than 2 years after he was arrested, he's a free man. Since July, he had been living under house arrest after being released from prison. He was accused of helping individuals in connection with the failed coup and faced up to 35 years in jail. The US government had been lobbying for all charges against him to be dropped.
If Turkey does not take immediate action to free this innocent man of faith and send him home to America, the United States will impose significant sanctions on Turkey until Pastor Andrew Brunson is free.
Anything like it.
In August, the US followed through with its promise when President Donald Trump announced sanctions on Turkey's interior and justice ministers over Brunson's case. The US also doubled tariffs on Turkish steel and aluminium. It retaliated as Turkey's currency, the lira, fell to record lows. Turkey responded with its own tariffs and said the final decision on Brunson lay with the courts.
It's a judicial process. We are still working on it. It's the decision of the independent judiciary in Turkey. Everybody has to respect that.
For more than 20 years, Brunson has lived in Turkey, running a small evangelical Christian church in Izmir. It's now unclear whether he and his family will stay or return to the United States. Caitlin McGee, TRT World.
Well, let's talk now to TRT World's diplomatic correspondent Andrew Hopkins, who's in Ankara. Andrew, hi. So now we have a sentence. Have we had a reaction from Ankara yet?
No, we haven't had any reaction from the Turkish government on this issue, but I think it's going to definitely help relations between the United States and Turkey. This is something that the United States has been really pushing on the Turkish government in the last few months. In fact, it's been causing a lot of problems, really, because the United States wants to try and get their Christian pastor released from prison. It's been campaigning on this for quite a few months now, and Turkey really seeing this as an interference really in its own legal system. Turkey saying that really it ought to have been able to continue, the justice system ought to continue until there is a resolution to this case, which we have seen now. So I think this is really going to open the way to some better relations maybe between the United States and Turkey.
And earlier, the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan was speaking in Isparta. Did he make a comment on this case about Andrew Brunson?
He hasn't said anything yet. He's made a couple of speeches to AK Party supporters already today, but hasn't made any comments as yet. We maybe will get something in the next few hours or so, maybe to reaction of what has happened in that court in Izmir and how Turkey and the US are now going to approach relations in the future. But I think we're going to have to wait a little while to see what's going to happen on that score.
And I mean, do you think it's odd that the fate of one pastor has sent diplomatic relations between the US and Turkey into a tailspin?
Well, it's not just the case of the pastor which has created problems between Turkey and the United States. There have been a lot of other issues. The thing about the case of the Christian pastor is that Turkey's economy was suffering from one or two challenges, and at the point where the United States decided to really make an issue of this, they decided to impose some sanctions on two Turkish ministers, on the Justice Minister and on the Interior Minister, and that seemed to really exacerbate Turkey's economic problems at that time. That may now help Turkey's economic situation to recover now that Andrew Brunson has been released. Maybe these sanctions will be removed in the coming days, but there are a number of other problems which Turkey and the United States are facing, including things like the extradition of Fethullah Gulen, the leader of the organisation, blamed for the failed coup attempt in Turkey in 2016. He's living in the United States, and for the past 2 years Turkey has been trying to extradite him. Another issue likely to come up soon is sanctions on Iran. The United States is going to be putting more sanctions on Iran next month after it withdrew from the nuclear treaty with that country. These could affect Turkey in a big way because Turkey is a major customer of Iranian gas and oil. So there are a lot of issues here surrounding Turkey-US relations which not necessarily strictly related to Andrew Brunson, but the fact that he's been released may help discussions on these other issues.
Well, thank you very much for that there, Andrew Hopkins, live from Ankara, and we'll definitely be coming back to you as well for more reaction from Ankara there. But let's now cross back to the court in front of Izmir. Hassan Abdullah is there. Hassan, tell us more what's happening at the court right now.
Aisha, just moments ago, Pastor Andrew Brunson has left the court premises. The US officials had been accompanying him. He was in a diplomatic number plate car. and he has now left the court premises. Now, we know that the prosecution was seeking 10 years jail term for him on terrorism charges, but after evaluating the evidence, he was sentenced to 3 years and 45 days. And because of the sentence that has already been served, the court decided to release him. And we understand that one of the factors that was taken into account was his health. Earlier, of course, in July this year, he was transferred from jail to house arrest because of deteriorating health conditions. And we're waiting for the detailed judgment at this point in time, but we understand that health was one of the factors, but that was taken into consideration. But he has now been released and he has left the court premises.
Hassan, so from this, do we take that the espionage charges were dropped for Andrew Brunson?
Well, we're waiting for the detailed judgment to understand precisely how the sentencing was carried out. It was 3 years and 45 days. We're waiting for the detailed judgment to know precisely what charges were carried forward. But obviously, the prosecution's case was weakened when 3 of the prosecution witnesses retracted their earlier statements. Earlier, they had said that they were first-hand witnesses to some of the gatherings that had allegedly taken place. And later on today, when they were cross-examined, they said that some of the information was based on what they had heard from other sources. That, of course, weakened the prosecution's case, and these were some of the factors, along with his health, that were taken into account in the sentencing.
Well, thank you very much for that there, Hassan Abdullah, live in front of the court in Izmir there. And let's talk now more to TRT World's Turkey analyst Yusuf Erim here in the studio with me now. Thanks, Yusuf, for coming in. So, judges have decided on 3 years, 1 month and 15 days. What do you make of the sentence?
Well, first thing, it's a landmark case for Turkish judicial history. And we have to remember, while Pastor Brunson will be going home, hopefully shortly, that he's not going home an innocent man. He's guilty. He's guilty on 1 charge of terror. And he is sentenced to 3 years, 1 month, 15 days now. He's released on time served. But it's important to remember that he's guilty. He has committed a crime in Turkey. But the time served and taking into account his health, the judge was lenient on him and handed a sentence that allows him to go home.
So, I know that you're not a law expert, but he did get 3 years, 1 month and 15 days, but he can still go home. Is that the decision made?
Yes, he can go home.
So the Turkish judicial system did come under fire throughout this case. So does that show the Turkish courts are independent?
This case is the most politically charged case I've ever seen. I mean, you have a U.S. president directly intervening in a Turkish court. I wouldn't have wanted to be the prosecutor or the judge. I mean, they must have been under immense pressure. But regardless of everything, I think they did a very, very good job. And they definitely showed that the Turkish judicial system is independent and will take the necessary decision.
So now going back to understand how this came to this point, basically. I mean, Andrew Brunson, the pastor, he was in jail for over 2 years now, but we only heard of him recently because he became important for the US only recently after he got under house arrest, and especially to Mike Pence. Why?
Well, Pastor Brunson's an evangelical Christian pastor. Mike Pence is from the same congregation. He's also an evangelical Christian. They're a big part of President Trump's voter base. And midterm elections are just a couple weeks away. Very, very important for Trump domestically to bring Pastor Brunson home. That's a lot of votes. That's a lot of support. His support is waning right now. He really needs that bump in the polls for the Republicans. And it's become a very, like I said, a very politicized case, and sanctions, tariffs, a lot of hard rhetoric coming from the United States, a NATO ally of Turkey, a strategic ally of Turkey. So personally, I'm actually very happy that this is all behind the two countries, and hopefully the U.S.-Turkish relationship could heal itself and move forward after this.
Well, before talking about the Turkey-US relationship, the US media reported today that a deal was reached between Turkey and the US. Do you believe so?
I heard about it last night. The NBC News reported that a deal was in place, then followed by the New York Times, followed by the Washington Post. This morning, first thing I did was called my contacts at the Turkish Foreign Ministry, and I talked to a very top level Turkish Foreign Ministry official, and he guaranteed there was absolutely no such deal. No such deal was even sat down and negotiated. President Erdogan in the past has said he does not have the power to intervene, and he cannot intervene and have Pastor Brunson released. That he like everyone else has to wait for the judge's decision. And like I said, the Foreign Ministry has completely denied such a deal. So I don't know where U.S. media, who they're quoting, where they're getting this from.
Okay, and he was accused of having links to the PKK and the Gülenist movement. And so tell us more on why that is very important for Turkey, as we understand.
Okay. Well, like I said in the beginning first, he's not innocent. He is guilty. He has been sentenced. One of the reasons why the sentence has dropped a little in time was because some of the witnesses had changed some of their testimony, and changing some of their testimony changed the court's charges against him, what he was being charged with. But he had very close links to the PKK. He had worked to help get PKK members that were in Southeast Turkey out of Southeast Turkey and into other countries and provide shelter for them, and also give them the guise of working as missionaries and working for his church. The way his church was first founded, members of the Gülenist organization helped them create the association that helped them establish the church that he works at. He also met with many top-level FETÖ members throughout his time over here. So there are clear links between him and terrorist organizations. And in the end, he was proven to be a member of a terrorist organization. How active, that obviously not very active, but he was still a member. He did provide support for these organizations.
So do you think it's due to only Pastor Andrew Brunson that US-Turkey relationship nearly hit rock bottom?
Well, it's a lot more complex than just Pastor Brunson, but for the short term right now, this is definitely going to be a Band-Aid on the wound, but it's not going to completely heal the wound. You still have an F-35 crisis. You have a sanctions crisis, which is probably going to be solved very, very quickly now that the Brunson case has reached a conclusion, because the sanctions were placed because of Brunson. So that will help a little, having the sanctions pulled back. Now, like I said, you have the F-35, you have the S-400 deal with Russia, which America is really adamantly against protesting this deal, because they feel that the S-400 missile system cannot be integrated with NATO missile systems, and it could put in danger the stealth technology of the F-35. You have American support for the YPG, a Kurdish militia group that Turkey considers a terrorist, and the Syrian arm of the PKK, which is also a terrorist organization recognized by America and the EU and Turkey as well. Besides that, you have just many other problems. You have the leader of the alleged July 15, 2016 coup, Fethullah Gülen, living in Pennsylvania. Turkey wants to extradite him. They've handed a lot of evidence, and they're still awaiting extradition. They're waiting for America to make a move. You have the Halkbank case with Iran sanctions. So as you can see, there's a lot of problems in that relationship. But this Pastor Brunson, in the short term, it will be a step forward, hopefully lifting one problem in that relationship, where now both sides can concentrate on solving other problems in the relationship.
Well, thank you very much for that there, Yusuf Erim. And so Sally Ayhan joins us now from Washington, D.C. Sally, let's get the reaction from the US there.
Well, at this stage, there's been a quiet hope, I think, that Pastor Brunson will be released and sent back to the US, or at least being able to travel back to the US. This has been obviously, a positive outcome for the US after months of tit-for-tat disagreements between Turkey and the US. It's something that the US has been hoping for, not only for a positive outcome for Pastor Brunson himself, but also for a win in terms of the Republican Party, especially in the lead up to the midterm elections. It's an important time for the US, it's an important time for President Trump and also Mike Pence, where they wish to really build up the evangelical supporter base. So obviously, a result like this, the evangelical pastor Brunson having his return to the US, and a sign that the US has somewhat shown strength and support for the evangelical supporter base, makes his standing and the Republican standing look fairly good in times for the midterm elections, where they're trying to defer a Democratic surge in Congress.
So, Sally, will the US lift sanctions now that Brunson is released?
Well, it seems like that the sanctions that were put on the two Turkish officials could be released, but also the tariffs on the aluminium and the steel tariffs. There was a threat that they could be doubled. Trump tweeting that could be a result. We'll have to see in time how that reaction will come about. At this point, the US has said that this move will ease economic pressures on Turkey. It was part of the argument between the two nations. Trump saying that if Pastor Brunson wouldn't be released, then Turkey would face stronger economic pressures. So this is something that the US perhaps will have to stick up for their word here and certainly show some sign that they're willing to give, given the fact that Pastor Brunson will be released.
And why has Pastor Andrew Brunson become such an important figure for the US, especially for Mike Pence?
Well, like I said, Pastor Brunson is in some ways a figure for the evangelical involvement in US foreign policy. Being an evangelical pastor living in Turkey, he plays an important role in the way that the US is represented in terms of the evangelical voter base here. So there's been a lot of pressure from the evangelicals on Trump and the Republican Party to try and ensure the release of Pastor Brunson. As we know, Mike Pence is an evangelical himself, also Pompeo. So there is a fairly strong standing to make sure that he is released. And just as I said, this is a very important time politically for the Republican Party as the Democrats start to try and gain momentum and try and take back Congress in time for the midterms. It's really important to make sure that the Republicans and President Trump himself are putting good standings, showing that they're doing everything they can to support their voter base.
Well, thank you very much for that there, Sally Ayhan, live there from Washington, D.C., getting the reaction from the U.S. there. And let's repeat for our viewers, well, the breaking news coming in from Izmir, from the court there. Turkey has ruled that a U.S. pastor being held on terrorism charges will be released from house arrest. And he was sentenced with 3 years, 1 month and 15 days. And let's get more analysis on it now from Muzaffer Şenal, the director of the Center for Modern Turkish Studies, who joins us now from Istanbul. Muzaffer, so what do you make of the sentence?
Actually, that due to the changes in the testimonials that the release of the pastor has taken place, and not only did just release, but also all judicial controls, including a travel ban. Now, immediately, the pastor Brunson will immediately move. Will go to America. As most probably, he will return his home.
And what does it mean in terms of Turkey-US relations?
I mean, in a short term, that I think so it will be a positive impact, but in a long term, what we can see that how it will be effective. I'm not sure to that how Trump will respond to this positive move. Hopefully, this is a hope for sure that about the first sanction, which is relating with the Brunson case, should be lifted. I hope it will come to an end. It will create a positive move on that issue. Still, just yesterday, Trump says that the Turkey and U.S. is working together on about Manjib issues in the northern Syria, and relating with the PYD issue is also Turkey and America is jointly have the, let's say, agreement still continuing. But the problem is that the S-300 missile system and the Gulen movement and the Halkbank case, I'm not sure that it will have a positive impact. We hope it will create a positive move for the, let's say, the normalization of the Turkish-American relations. This is an hope as of today, but it will be a positive step for the future relation.
Well, thank you very much for that insight there, Muzaffer Şenal. And as we said, the breaking news coming in from the court in Turkey. Pastor Andrew Brunson was charged earlier with espionage and links to terrorist organization, but the court has ruled that he only gets now 3 years, 1 month and 15 days, and he's released from house arrest. And we'll have more on top of the hour with Simon McGregor-Wood.